welcome back to the Fretboard Journal podcast. I'm your host, Jason Verlindi. As always, that's John Rauhaus playing in the background. Today on the show, we peel back the curtain a little bit on how the Fretboard Journal is made. I'm talking to one of our many contributors, Jamie Etherington, who is based out of Australia. Jamie started writing for the Fretboard Journal a few years ago, and he's been turning in some of our absolute favorite contributions to date, including the article with Annie Elliott, the illustrator of Leo Kottke's 6 and 12-string guitar cover. Jamie and I think, have pretty similar music tastes if social media is to be believed, and it was great to hang out with him at last summer's Fretboard Summit. As you hopefully all know, our next summit takes place August 21st to 23rd, 2025, once again in Chicago. You can go to fretboardsummit.org to register. So for the last few years, Jamie's been writing all these stories for us, and it was about 2 years ago that he suggested penning a piece on luthiers and their favorite tools. Not necessarily the tools that get used the most in their guitar making or guitar repair process, but the tools that they just, for whatever reason, have the most sentimental connection with. I think I was probably a little slow to reply on Jamie's original email because in about a week or two's time, in the time it took me to write him back and say, this sounds like a fantastic idea, he had contributions from, I don't know, dozens of luthiers from around the world, including some pretty heavy hitters. And when all was said and done, we had nearly 100 people who wanted to be a part of this story. Included were many Fretboard Journal subjects and former podcast guests, including a lot of new people who are doing incredible work we just haven't gotten around to talking to yet. And as I was looking at this ever-growing document, I had to have the conversation with Jamie that, honestly, this was more than a magazine article. It was a book of sorts. And so, fast forward to a month ago, we just put out the Fretboard Journal's first ever hardcover book. It's called The Luthier's Toolbox. It's compiled by Jamie Etherington. Another Jamie in my life, Jamie Muehlhausen, did the design for it. We had it printed at a printer that does exquisite work in the world of hardcover books, and it's truly a beautiful object. I'm guessing some of you have already ordered it and have devoured it, and some of you might be hearing about it for the very first time. And if I'm being totally candid, which I always am on this podcast, the reason I waited a month to release this episode is because we had to play catch up. We had so many orders from the holiday season till now. We finally have everybody's pre-orders in the mail, so we finally can take the next onslaught of orders from you all. But we printed a couple thousand of these books. They are a beautiful thing. And if you are at all intrigued by the world of luthiery and how luthiers operate, whether or not you yourself are a woodworker of any sorts, I think you'll probably enjoy this book. It's a pretty cool thing. I'm pretty proud of it. And I'm glad that the Fretboard Journal got to be a conduit for Jamie's incredible idea. So today on the show, all the way from Australia, we're talking to Jamie Etherington. I hope you enjoy the chat. What else can I tell you? The Fretboard Journal's 55th issue is obviously out now. Hopefully you heard that Jim D'Addario interview that we did just a couple of weeks ago. I've gotten so much incredible feedback over the last month or so about this issue. So if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time. Go to fretboardjournal.com, click on the subscribe tab. I want to thank our sponsors, of course. They are Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar right here in Seattle, Washington. If you ever find yourself in Seattle or just want to peruse one of the coolest stores ever online and check out their ever-growing inventory of guitars, synths, and all points in between. They've got a whole bunch of amplifiers as well. One of my favorite stores, they've also got a full-service repair and restoration shop. We are also brought to you by our friends at Peghead Nation. If you want to play better this year, and who doesn't, go to Peghead Nation, use the discount code FRETBOARD. You can get your first month free. They have so many incredible instructors, many of whom have been featured on this podcast or in the pages of our magazine. And it's the perfect place if you want to be better at bluegrass, Americana, old-time music, jazz, and all points in between. Last but not least, our friends at Stringjoy Strings are offering you all 10% off your first order with the promo code Fretboard when you check out. They've got banjo strings, mandolin strings, acoustic, and electric guitar strings now. Best of all, Stringjoy can do custom sets and all sorts of unique things that you probably can't have done by the bigger guys. So reach out to them and tell them the Fretboard Journal sent you, stringjoy.com. And now, with all of that out of the way, here is my conversation with one of the Fretboard Journal's many incredible contributors, Jamie Etherington, and we're talking all about the new book, The Luthier's Toolbox, which I will include a link to in the show notes. You can snag your copy before it sells out. It undoubtedly will. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Before we talk about the project at hand, I think that I can safely say most Fretboard Journal contributors, and it's a very wide net. There's all sorts of writers, amateur, professional, luthiers, musicians, but I feel like everyone who takes the plunge and decides to write a story for the magazine, universally there are some interesting backstories as to like how you got into guitars, why you feel compelled to write about them. So I despite working with you a whole bunch over the last couple of years, I don't know a lot about what your life is like in Australia or how you found guitar. So why don't we start there?
Okay, I'm very happy to give you a potted history. Well, I'm sort of English by birth and mid-50s now, and I spent my first 40 years in the UK working in publishing, which is where I met Susan, my future, Aussie wife, and had the two children over there. And Susan wanted to move back to Australia, so I dutifully followed. So this is like the second chapter of my life, living in a beautiful, I have to admit, a beautiful part of Australia, about an hour and a half east of Melbourne. We're on, I think, 80 acres. So day by day, invariably, I'm a stay-at-home dad, a farmer, aspiring writer. But really, what prompted me to get into this writing lark, I mean, particularly for the Fretboard Journal, was just, I have to admit, a boredom with one of my other jobs here, which is a research assistant and academic writer, writing on very dry medical subjects. So mid-40s, 10 years, well, probably more recently than that, 5 years ago. I just wanted to write something that I was interested in, passionate, and probably met my obsessive tendencies. And I mean, the Fretboard Journal, I think I've been a subscriber for 9 or 10 years now, and the articles, they just sort of hit the mark. They're slightly, well, as you would say, and I mean, that's probably the ethos of the Fretboard Journal, approaching things at a slightly different angle. I mean, there's lots of mainstream guitars magazines and publications that will do the mainstream stuff. I sort of really keyed into it and thought, well, I'll give it a go. And here we are a few years later talking about a book.
Now, was life in the UK rural and involving land and a farm, or are you a total fish out of water?
No, I'm not. Fun enough, I'm talking about life coming full circle. I was brought up on a dairy farm. We didn't actually own it; we just simply rented the farmhouse. So, all the joys and none of the responsibilities of milking. But for a kid growing up, an idyllic existence. Nothing but happy memories. So, a peculiar twist of fate, circumstance that 40 odd years later, I find myself. Back in a sort of very similar situation. And I will say this part of Victoria is probably about as English as you're going to get in Australia, Tasmania apart. So I feel very much at home. I mean, I still feel very English, and I miss a lot of aspects and people in England, particularly family. But it's life out here is lovely. It's just a bloody long way from anywhere.
Yeah, and just to paint the picture, we can all picture what, rolling green hillside of the UK. I think when we think of Australia, we think of the big cities, and then we think of Ayers Rock, and then we think of the outback. What exactly does your land look like?
Well, it's funny. I on the way back from the summit last August, I had a couple of days in LA, and unfortunately, all those hills have sort of been burnt to a crisp now, tragically. But there were parallels in terms of the physical geography. So obviously, people live in Southern California and are familiar with it. It's not too dissimilar to that, but it is. It is green. I mean, it's sort of premier dairy farming country, high rainfall relative for Australia. It's not exactly like the Pacific Northwest, but it is high annual rainfall. So it's probably a little bit greener, but it's a beguiling landscape. And where the house is, it's sort of nestled, folded into the hills. I'd have to say, not a day goes by. Sort of open the curtains and you think, "Wow, this is lovely." So so I painted a picture. Come visit.
I would love to. And your story, the most recent story you did for Fretboard Journal readers, is the Annie C. Elliott one, which we'll talk about. But you've pitched me on a bunch of stories. We've got a few in the hopper that are going to run at some point very soon. Yeah. They've all been very American slanted. So you've never pitched me on Paul Kelly or Aussie musicians or builders. You've never even pitched me on the UK folks. So are you just thoroughly steeped in American folk music and bluegrass and Americana?
Yeah, I've never really sat down and analysed it, but now you mention it, it's a theme, and I suppose, I'm sort of trawling back. I mean, as a child, I was sort of fascinated with America. My dad had, I've got more here now, countless books on sort of John Muir books, natural history, and architecture, art, all really with a sort of a very strong North American slant. So it's probably seeped into my bones. I'm sort of drawn, in the UK westward, but I suppose here sort of northeastward. There are some ideas I have for future stories, which I won't discuss here for time reasons. But there's one there with a very Australian slant. So I will break the mold, I promise.
I've loved your contributions. I was just kind of curious about that because they all have had a very U.S. angle and at a depth. I mean, the Annie Elliott one. That's such a specific piece of American guitar culture that Leo, basically for folks who don't know, Leo Kottke's 6 and 12 string guitar, one of the greatest acoustic instrumental albums of all time. I think that's safe to say. And has this iconic armadillo drawing on the cover. And you track down the illustrator who despite being an 8-hour, 6-hour drive away from her, I didn't know that she was even alive and kicking or where she was. So talk about that.
Yeah. That one came about, I'm trying to think of the timelines now. It was probably certainly sort of 18 months ago. It was just a wet Sunday afternoon here, and I've sort of not got a massive sort of vinyl collection, but I tend to stack them at least with one sort of facing out, and just sort of for aesthetic reasons, really. And it happened to be sort of Leo Kottke's Armadillo album, which I've always loved. I was just thought, just really quite like to sort of start on another article for your consideration. And my eye just caught it, and I thought, I've always loved that. Out of curiosity, I wonder who drew the armadillo. And it was just a sort of an idle moment, and tried to Google Annie Elliott, and zilch came up, other than her being listed as the designer of the cover. So sort of interest peaked, and those, really well and truly going down a rabbit hole. And I think I'm not going to be thwarted here. There has to be something in this day and age, in the internet age, that should be able to find out something about her. So that was a strange one, because that story could have could have died a death on multiple turns. I don't know. It suffered many heart attacks, but managed to revive it because these openings over the course of 6 weeks just kept opening. And I suppose I'm nothing if not tenacious, and kept pursuing them. So yeah, by just sort of chance meetings, posting on a social, on a Facebook Minneapolis social Facebook page. Yeah, it's just somebody made a comment, and then yeah, the dominoes started to fall. But I mean that was that was all bias apart. That was a delightful story because it had that human element, and the fact that tracked down Annie, and Annie has had a tough, without going into details, had a tough 30 years, and was pretty much done with artwork. So to find her through his sister was a lovely outcome. And we got to sort of visit her last August, and actually stayed with Junie in Springfield. And that was, I mean, there were many highlights of that summit trip, but that stopover in Oregon was right up there. And it was fun. It was just, 48 hours filled with laughter, reminiscences, a few tears, and yeah, they're sort of friends for life. I'm desperate to go back. Probably won't be this year, but maybe next.
You had the ultimate Fretboard Summit vacation, because you did get to do that. Yeah. Most of us just flew into Chicago, got our 3 days of magic, but you stretched it out.
Yep. Yeah, there are a lot of elements to that trip, which, I hesitate to say a trip of a lifetime because I'd love to repeat it, but I suspect it might be difficult to recapture that huge sort of dopamine release over the 3 days of the summit. That was remarkable. And what you've curated and created with the Fretboard Journal and the magazine and podcast, but particularly the summit. I mean, I know you probably view it differently because the organization, I wouldn't even want to go there. But an extraordinary, and I know you're off to NAMM next week, but a complete antithesis to that. Complete.
Yeah. I'm a little dreading my Anaheim trip, but it will be great to see some of those same familiar faces.
Yeah.
I am the lucky recipient of a handful of your stories that have yet to run, which I'm very excited about. Mm-hmm. But this book on luthiers and their tools, which I had to go back in my inbox. The origin story is about, at least on my end, is about 2 years ago is when you first told me that this was something on your radar and pursuing. Why don't you talk to me about how this originally, it was supposed to be a Fretboard Journal story and how it kind of snowballed into what it is today?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I initially conceived it as it might possibly make quite a nice photo essay, something short and sweet, unusual for me. Oh, goodness me, I'm really trawling back here. But I think the initial thinking was that, well, actually, 4 or 5 chisels, really rather standard hand tools, and just a little short commentary from each contributor on what it is, and any backstory associated with it. We'll have to, in interjection, I feel a huge sort of imposter syndrome here talking about tools, because I have zilch woodworking ability, but I do always have had a fascination with workshops, and in Fretboard Journal articles and the periodicals. It doesn't really matter what's on the bench, if it's a guitar, but my eyes are always drawn to the background, mm-hmm. And what's lurking in the corners, the dusty corners, and on the shelves. So I think, oh, yes. And I'm an inveterate sort of scanner of sort of Lee Nielsen and Stu Mack catalogues. Although, I just love them. I mean, tools are always sort of a great form and function thing, and they do a great job in the right hands, just not my hands.
You and I can both have imposter syndrome, but I think to our credit, what I've tried to do with the magazine and what you've certainly done is bring this very insider world of guitar making, we're a lot of us. I mean, it's why the Fretboard Journal, I think, has a certain level of popularity, is because we love, peeking into the workshop windows and seeing how John Monteleone or Linda Manzer or anyone does their magic, even if none of us should be anywhere near a power tool.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I mean, yes, initially as a photo essay. So I sort of fired off probably 5 or 6 emails to the great and good, I would say the usual suspects. And they responded. But what was slightly surprising for me, although I should have anticipated this, of course, was actually that they were only too willing to tell the story behind their favorite chisel or gouge or plane. And then I thought, well, there's probably more to this than just a sort of a 4-pager with some sort of fancy photographs. So I just then expanded it to, I don't know, 30 or 40 people, and not really. I was just simply doing the numbers, and then thought, well, I can sort of sift through them and work out what are the sort of the stellar ones. And lo and behold, to every man and woman, they responded, and then that's really, perhaps it then sort of moved on to a long form essay, a really deep dive. But well, you know me, I didn't stop, so there were even more. So I think I ended up emailing over the course of a couple of weeks, probably 100 contributors. But I'd sort of moved away from just doing the obvious candidates. Some it's important to have them there, but I thought, well, if it's going to be inclusive, it needs to be diverse, and we need to sort of not get and contact people that the younger generation, people just starting out in their careers, because they would have stories to tell. So I think at some point you told me to stop, which is what I needed.
A big part of being an editor is trimming stuff out and telling people to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I should have realized, because I mean, I worked 15, 20 years for a medical publisher, and that was exactly what I did. But I as a project manager and editor, but I sort of failed to apply it to my own output, as it were. So I think Kevin Ryan was the final nail in the coffin. He was the last one, and he sort of crept in. Then I really, I don't want to say it didn't take a lot of effort, because I suppose it did, and I think my wife would attest to that. I was just every waking hour for a sort of a month's period, I was just sort of concentrating on this. But things seem to align themselves quite nicely into sort of distinct sections. So the sifting process and allocating each tool, each piece of machinery to a particular style of tool or machinery was relatively easy and actually quite fun. So I mean, the book. Well, then I sent everything to you, and you then suggested that, well, maybe this could be a book.
What was the original email that you sent to people? Because I've tried to describe it. I think I've said this a few different ways. Yeah. You know, what tool, which now with LA, like what tool would you take out of a burning building? What tool means the most? But what was your original pitch to all of these luthiers to get them to focus on one particular tool?
Well, yes, I mean, perhaps a little bit contrived, because I said it has to be an item, whether it's a chisel or a sort of bolted down piece of machinery. I'd like to see somebody get one of those sort of those huge, what do you call them? Sort of Watkins piece of machinery out of a burning building. But the proviso had to have a story, and had to be something that had personal significance, rather than just say, yes, this is my beautiful Japanese chisel. It had to have a backstory. I mean, otherwise it's not terribly interesting. And it would simply turn out to be, I think, probably quite a stuffy elitist book, if it's just a parade of beautiful chisels. American-made, British-made, whatever, you may as well look at it as a Sumac catalogue. So it had to have that point of difference. Yeah. So I think the criteria was you can choose anything. It could be heavy duty, semi-industrial, ultra modern. Could be traditional, historically, personally significant. Self-made. Actually, I should mention that when the self-made, adapted, and innovative, because that's where the true creativity lies. I suppose all woodworkers would have that element, but I think luthiers in particular, they're making a sort of probably a multi-dimensional object. It's got to sound right. It's got to be built right. Otherwise, it ain't going to work. So yeah, I was hoping that one would sort of investigate sort of problem-solving abilities, for which luthiers are well known, and I think the book is full of them. And the final category, unusual, unexpected, and that has some real gems in it as well. So it came together really, in terms of organisation, really quite easy. In terms of the other part of the brief was not to provide too much material, otherwise the word count would just be blown out of the water. So I think I was asking for maybe 200, 300 words. And you can guarantee that there were quite a few who did not adhere to that, which was fine. But as it worked out, I mean, there are some very short ones in there. And then there's also sort of longer ones. But that's great. And the longer ones, I'd like to sort of Flip Scipio, Chris Jenkins and Jack Tarlington. I mean, that's great. There's scope to go into quite a bit of detail, and you get, just those little insights into sort of that people's backgrounds, and they're sort of reminiscing over their years of training all those years ago. It's good. There's some, I think, all bias apart, there's some sort of very good untold stories, little cameos in there.
I mean, I think I'd like to think everyone we feature in the magazine, and certainly everyone of the nearly 100 contributors, I think, to this book, the thing that all of these builders, and I'm including, amp repair person Colleen Fazio, and some of these, they all have a point of view, and I feel like the tools that they decided to write about just elaborates on that and kind of accentuates that they all have these unique personalities. Even, you sort of downplayed the chisels, but like even how people decide to talk about or not to talk about their chisels is sort of like intriguing, the submissions that I saw, at least.
Yes. Yeah. I did very much. Insights into their personality, and you probably met the majority of them. I've only met a few, but that their choices seem to fit with their personalities. I mean, one off the top of my head is Bob Robinson in Chicago. His choice of a chisel that is part made from a crack pipe that he found in the back alley, although at the time he didn't know it was a crack. And that's having had a brief conversation with Bob, he did. I thought, goodness me, I'd love to sit down for a few hours and spend some time just chatting, not necessarily about guitars, but about life. I'd sort of, that's one reason enough to come back to Chicago to spend some time with Bob.
Totally. I think he's throwing our pre-party this year, which, fingers crossed,
I heard.
Putting him on the spot. I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting about this, and kudos to you, is like, I think a luthier could benefit from it and go like, oh, I had never thought of using that to heat up my hide glue. And then I think for the us average Joe civilians, we'll go, oh my gosh, I thought I knew everything about this builder, but look at that. And I think there's insights to be had from either of our little communities.
Yeah. And I think the book, I mean, it's eclectic and it's diverse. There's informative stuff in there, and there's little hacks that people, luthiers in particular, can use. But I think just for the sort of the innocent bystander who's just simply interested in guitars and has is curious about it, there's some fun stuff in there, and some just some insights into sort of people's backgrounds and their journeys as well. And it's I have to say I'm particularly excited for the young guys, people like Oliver March and Eve Meister, who they're just young guys and girls just starting out. So it gives them a voice, and their voice is worth hearing, because they're making superb instruments. Actually, I'm sort of diverting a little bit. I think it's quite important for me to say this is a collaborative affair. I might have compiled it, but it's not exactly a cast of hundreds, but there are certain. It has involved an awful lot of people. Obviously, you as publisher, Jamie Muhlhausen in California, who designed it, and I've worked long enough in publishing to know that books fall or stand by the design and what he came up with, the layout and the typeface chosen is lovely. It's a beautiful book. It feels it's the bee's knees.
Yeah, we had it printed it's getting printed as I type or as we talk in the States, and it'll be out in the first week of February. A few pallets are going to arrive at my friend's loading dock. I don't have a loading dock at the Fretboard Journal, so my friend across town graciously agreed to take the truck. Then we're going to have our little team package them up and mail them out to everybody. But we went design-wise for, I don't think it's I wouldn't call it stuffy, but we went for sort of a classic, layout and design with Jamie, as you said, the other Jamie in my life designing it. And went for something that I think, looks like it could have been made 50 years ago or this year. But as you've pointed out, like some of these stories are fun and quirky. It's not over the top academic.
No. Oh, no, not at all. And I was actually quite anxious to avoid that. If it's just a parade of the great and good, then it's a nice book, but it doesn't really do anything different. It has to be diverse and sort of fulfill a lot of other criteria. And I'm just delighted. I mean, there's a sort of a kinship with the Lost Art press books, and they're great. I have to admit, and until you mentioned it, I hadn't come across them, but I see they're actually available for order here, and it's just a problem choosing which one. But my goodness me, those are a magnificent books. So if this looks 1/3 as good as that, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, they were an inspiration for sure in terms of telling Jamie, this is kind of how I think it should look, and getting your feedback. Where are you at with guitars on your own? Like, do you have a big guitar collection? Your love for Luthier is so apparent every time we email.
Yeah, I do. I mean, when does it become a collection?
After one?
I think there's probably 12. There's probably a few more that I've forgotten about. But yes, I do. And they range from... they range from very, very cheap knockabout guitars to some quite nice ones. I mean, I tried to learn as a child. I wouldn't say a child, probably 12, 13, but I just found it as many people do it, the most excruciatingly painful experience. It was on a cheap nylon, fingers hurt and bled, and I didn't touch a guitar until I was probably early 40s. Fairly typical story, midlife, not into sports cars. So I thought, I'd like to sort of revisit it. So just bought a nice Laravel. And I have to say, that's probably still my favorite. I sort of really bonded with that one. And just over the years, just added guitars. So it's probably standing at about 12. Probably the most notable one is I think probably a 2017 commission Matt Ike of Mule Russophonic to make me a brass tricone. And that is just a magnificent instrument. And I am strictly just a home player. I have no pretensions to play to a wider audience other than friends and the family. And it's just, yeah, it's a creative outlet, probably very much as the writing is a creative outlet. It's something I need to do. And fortunately, an understanding wife, I'm afforded the space to be able to do it. But the guitar, yeah, is just a joy, even if it's just learning a simple Beatles song. That is enough for me. But they are, yeah, just to hold, just a simple E chord. I'm done. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I was actually going to mention Matt as in this interview because the chance to meet him, having sort of corresponded all these years and having had him make a guitar for me, that was just another highlight of the summit. Just sort of meeting Matt and oh, Mr. Etherington, oh, Matt Ike, and just huge bear hug, and yeah, there's a closeness and sort of a personal connection, even though we live, I don't know, 15,000 miles apart, all through a guitar, and yeah, and it's so much more than the guitar. I mean, you feature Matt in the latest issue of the Fretboard Journal, and I'm just so glad he's got the feature that he deserves because he's a fascinating individual, sort of great advocate for sort of mental health, just somebody I really sort of bonded with, and actually interesting. His contribution to the book was a sort of Pexto circle shears, which he freely admits he no longer uses, but it's a great one to have in the book because it represents a staging post in his career. So it's what it represents, and he keeps it around in the workshop. Really, I imagine as a touchstone for the hard journey to get to where he is now, and that's brilliant. And I think that's probably the ethos of the book, that it's all about the personal stories.
Yeah,
the tools are great and they're lovely to look at, but it is backstory. So I've diverted. Yes, I have a collection of guitars, and they all give pleasure. But as anybody would attest who's got guitars, they're just one or two that you sort of go to almost on a daily basis.
And as a bona fide guitar geek, I mean, you're writing stories for us. You've compiled a whole book that we're putting out. Have you been able to visit many of these workshops?
Not in Australia, no. I do have a good luthier friend, sort of half an hour drive away, and he's I won't give too many details because he's still just away at the moment. But I mean, he's making some fabulous guitars with King Billy pine tops.
That really must be Australian? I don't even know. I don't think most of us have heard of that.
Well, I need to write a story on it, don't I? Yeah, King Billy is a remarkable wood. It's not commercially available. Steve managed to procure really one of the last sets to come out of Tasmania, but the wood is old. I mean, the trees are 1,000, 1,500 years old, dry as a bone, and they sound magnificent. So I visited Steve's workshop, and again, start fossicking around and looking at the tools that he's got, but he's probably the closest one. I'm hopefully meeting up with Jack Tarlington in a couple of months, and also Anthony Payne of Harvester Guitars, both of who contributed to the book. In the States, well, actually, went to see Nate Woods of Steinman Guitars.
Who did the photographs of Annie Elliott? Yeah,
he did. And lives, stone's throw from Jeannie and Annie, which is a strange turn of events. So that was good. That was a fun half an hour. It was sort of a bit in and out, but it was great to sort of meet Nate. But other than that, no, I haven't. I wish I could spend more time. So in the workshops.
we'll have to get you back here for the summit and then give you some field
Yeah.
trips.
Yeah, well, I mean, if Bob Robinson's hosting a pre-summit party, that'll be I'll be I'll be the guy in the background, sort of looking at his collection of planes.
I know,
and his crack pipe chisel, of course.
Yes, and
yeah.
So 12 guitars in your collection. Are there any on order? Any on the way? Anything you're daydreaming about owning? No.
Oh, there's. Yeah, there's always the next guitar, but for financial prudence, I think it's sort of best to just to hold off. And really, I mean, there's only so much room, and I'm very happy just to enjoy the ones I've got. There's a couple of really nice banjos in there as well, an English-made one and a sort of one made in Tennessee, and they're all they're just that is sufficient for the moment, until GAS syndrome rears its ugly head again, which it will.
Yeah,
I'm sure. Yeah. But yeah.
Besides,
I'm content at the moment.
Yeah. Besides the podcasts that we do and the magazine, how does somebody in what sounds like fairly rural Australia stay connected to the greater guitar community? Is it mostly Instagram or the magazines, podcasts? Like, how do you, are there Reddit?
Yeah, probably
everything.
Yeah, probably a plethora of things really. Sort of podcasts, the Fretboard Journal. Yeah, Instagram in particular. And you're touching on something that sort of resonates with me. That I do think me writing these stories, compiling this book is probably a product. Well, not probably. It is a product of living here. I mean, I don't. The work I do, I work at home. Whether that and full-time parenting, as you would know, is full on, and there's always something to do. But outside the confines of the house, I mean, it's not remote, but there is that need to forge connections with people. And I think, I know that underlies the whole reason for writing, that it's a need in me to reach out to like-minded people, forge connections, and it just sort of an insatiable curiosity, all within the context of guitar, music, Luthiery, just to find out more. And the writing is a vehicle for that. I think I'll be doing it anyhow, but it's allied with that need to do something creative. That's probably what underlies all these articles I keep sending you.
No, and they're great.
All North American based.
You and I are cut from the same cloth. Like I know there are people out there who just view guitars as tools and don't need to know the backstory of who built their instrument. But I think you and I are both like, no, that's just the instrument itself is just the icebreaker. We want to know what makes that person tick.
Absolutely. And if they become friends in the process, so much the better. And that's why that last August trip, I came over with my mate Bill Downey. He's a winemaker, and he had an absolute ball. I mean, we both did, and it was actually interesting. A lot of the conversations we had there, and met so many different people, weren't necessarily, and in most cases, weren't actually about guitars or music. They were just about life.
Totally.
I mean, Bill was in the foyer of the old school. What's it called again? The Museum of Old
School folk music. Yep.
He was talking to TJ Thompson, and they weren't talking about guitars. They were talking about wine.
Yeah, of course.
And probably a relief for TJ, I would have thought, to be talking about something other than people coming up to him and talking about guitars. But that was just sort of a lovely moment. And there was so many similar situations, just sort of serendipitous meetings on stairwells with people you've only just read about, and just happy to chat. We teamed up with Jonathan Stout on the that sort of pre-Thursday evening. He found us, we found him, and sort of 3 days. We just, lunches together, drinks together, catching up. We were just we're all like schoolboys, I think. It's just, what can we do next? What can we do next? So it was just that, a huge dopamine release. Thank goodness it didn't go for 5 days. I think we would have couldn't have coped.
Well, even those of us who live here in the States in major metropolitan areas, I think are yearning for those kind of cool connections with each other. And so I can imagine for you, being from Australia and obsessing over so much of the stuff that happens here in North America, it must have been really special.
Yeah. It all feels, in retrospect, a bit like a fever dream. I know it happened. I have the evidence it happened, but it is quite. It was quite an extraordinary experience. And just to have access, and I mean, I don't whether you can do it at NAMM, I don't know, but just to sort of have a 5-minute chat with Andy Powers, and just to update, because he contributed two contributions to the book, so just to update him on that, and then we just started talking about Tasmania and the time that he was down there on a wood buying trip and was rather probably foolishly had a morning surf on one of the Tasmanian beaches. I think he's probably still hasn't warmed up yet, even though it was 20 years ago. So I think just the realization that these people are great and they're only too happy to share their knowledge and talk. I was a bit sort of reticent about, I use Andy Powers as an example, but I thought, well, he's going to be done with people chatting to him and seeking him out. But it was just a very lovely, cool conversation. And that happened on so many occasions with so many different people. I mean, friendships sort of formed, and even with sort of fellow attendees, the sort of three guys, Adam Rose in particular, just standing next to each other in the registration queue and bonded. I mean, how good's that? So we keep in touch, and I like to think I'll be there next year, but later this year. If I can get a house pass, that'd be great. But I'm quite frankly, I'm quite happy just to fly in, fly out. So I'm only away for a week, and
Well, I'm so glad you were able to be a part of that, and I'm also so grateful. If you asked me 2 years ago, is the Fretboard Journal going to put out a cloth-bound hardcover sewn book, I would have been like, no, why would we do that? But your submission, which snowballed, like I said, I'm so grateful for, and I'm so grateful for all your contributions. You really have, where were you 20 years ago when we started? I'm glad you're in my orbit now.
Oh. Yeah. I think 20 years ago, I wouldn't have done it. I don't think I would have had the imposter syndrome would have been would have gone so deep. I would have thought, who the hell am I to do this? Without getting too touchy-feely, it's been a sort of fundamental thing in my life, having writing these articles, and joy of joy that you like them and want to publish them. So mutually beneficial. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's safe to say throughout 2025, your writing is going to appear in the Fretboard Journal and some pretty big stories. Not big like Steve Vai exclusive interview big, but actually meaty, long form journalism. Yeah. Well,
you'll announce it in due course, but that's one which is it's from a publishing point of view, it's absolutely ridiculous. But it's
what we're here for.
It goes off on tangents. Good. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. I'll include links. I can't wait to see this book. I know you can't wait to see it too, and folks can order it now if they want.
Yeah. I hope everybody enjoys reading it. And
All right, that was my conversation with Jamie. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, send me feedback, send me interview ideas, send me whatever you want to podcast@fretboardjournal.com. And thanks, as always, for tuning in.